In this video, we're going over the best level or rank 11 monsters in the game. An incredibly unpopular level, which probably has the least amount of monsters occupying this range. And at number 10, we have Liebe, Rebuilder of Worlds. This card has the effect where it can only be special summoned from your hand during a turn in which you haven't special summoned, and if there are at least 8 or more link monsters with different names on the field or in both players' graveyards. So, not something you can actually bring out during your first turn, but it's very possible to bring this out immediately on your second turn, as a lot of decks are able to combo into a whole bunch of link monsters and can fulfill the requirements for it by themselves without requiring your opponent to use any link monsters. And what you get if you bring this card out is on spell speed 4, you get to return all monsters on the field, in the graveyards, and that are banished back into the decks. And also, this card's summon cannot be negated. So if you're able to bring this card out, there's almost nothing your opponent can do to stop its effect from happening, which will allow you to kind of reset the game and wipe out your opponent's field of monsters, which is really good. However, this card does require a lot of setup on your part to use, and cannot be used during the same turn that you set it up, as one of its requirements is not special summoning any other monsters that turn. If it didn't have that little downside to it, it might see play, and it's that one little restriction that kind of puts this card into gimmick territory, which is why it's only at number 10 on this list. It's still better than a lot of the other level 11 monsters, which should say something about how few of them there are. And at number 9, we have Darklord Morningstar. This is a level 11 Darklord monster, an archetype that's full of high-level Dark-type monsters, so it's very appropriate for them to have at least one level 11. And what it does is, if this card is tribute summoned, you can special summon Darklord monsters from your deck, up to the number of effect monsters your opponent controls. Now, this effect is amazing. If your opponent has a full board of monsters, it allows you to special summon up to 4 other monsters from your deck. But of course, this deck rarely sees play in Darklord decks because it obviously has restrictions to it, just like Liebe, Rebuilder of Worlds. They can only use this effect if it's tribute summoned, and also this card cannot be special summoned. Now, a tribute summon isn't that big of a deal, but the card not allowing itself to be special summoned kinda goes against the whole Darklord archetype, which is all about special summoning themselves from the hand or graveyard. They kind of excel at special summoning from the graveyard even, but this card's effect has the potential to be super good, so its restrictions are kind of warranted. It also has a couple of other minor effects, like it can't be targeted by card effects while you control another Darklord monster, and it allows you to mill cards from your deck in order to gain life points. Now, Morningstar rarely sees play in Darklord decks, but of the few Darklord decks that have seen competitive success, a couple of them did play one copy of Darklord Morningstar. It's not bad, it's just not a card you can use on your first turn to set up your plays, and is very reliant on your opponent having a board and not negating the effect as soon as it comes out. So it still makes this list, if at a low spot, just slightly above the card that would only be used in gimmick decks. And at number 8, we have Star Eater. This was the first ever level 11 generic synchro monster added to the game, and for a long time, Star Eater was the only level 11 synchro, but it actually saw play because it wasn't half bad. It has 3200 attack, gets under Solemn Judgment since its summon can't be negated, and has great battlefield protection where, if it attacks, it becomes unaffected by other card effects until the end of the damage step. So it temporarily gains the protection of Ultimate Falcon, which is not half bad, but it would be a lot better if it negated the effects of all of the other cards on the field when it declared an attack, similar to Ancient Gear cards. Because if Star Eater does declare an attack and your opponent uses Mirror Force, Star Eater will be fine and not be destroyed, but your other monsters will still be destroyed. So the effect seems like it's a lot better than the Ancient Gear effects, since it gains that ever so important invulnerability, but it's actually a little bit worse, which isn't that big of a deal. Although, since all it did was give itself protection when it attacked, it was vulnerable to pretty much any form of removal, and was only good for attacking over things. And generally, extra deck monsters are much more useful if they can impact the field in some way or negate, and Star Eater doesn't really do any of those things. It was just a convenient synchro level to go into if you happened to have the cards in the field that allowed you to go into a level 11 synchro monster, in case you were trying to cover all of your bases in your extra deck. And at number 7, we have Gashadokuro, the Skeletal Mayakashi. This is the other level 11 synchro monster in the game, and surprisingly has generic materials, so is another option besides Star Eater if you want a level 11 synchro monster. Now, what this card does is it has two different effects. One of them, which is the condition for how it can special summon itself from the graveyard, and the other is the effect it gains if it's special summoned from the graveyard. So, if a Link monster you control is destroyed by your opponent, you get to banish one other zombie monster from your graveyard to special summon this card. And if this card is special summoned from the graveyard, it can become unaffected by other card effects for the rest of the turn. Now, I don't know why they keep giving this effect to level 11 synchros, just a limited immunity, but it seems to be a theme amongst them. Limited immunity is good, but the real meat and bones of immunity is the staying power it provides. Part of the reason Ultimate Falcon is so good is because it's always immune to card effects, and can kind of passively stall out your opponent if they don't have a way to deal with it immediately. Although if you only gain the immunity for one turn, then it's real easy to play around. Now, this card is part of the Mayakashi archetype, and really the only reason it sees play in that archetype is because it's real easy to bring this card out. You see, Mayakashi kind of revolve around this combo with Daki, the Graceful Mayakashi, which is a level 2 tuner, which can special summon itself from the graveyard if a Mayakashi monster is special summoned from the extra deck, and this is not at all once per turn. So, what you do is bring out Daki from the deck with Hajun, the Winged Mayakashi, which will give you the materials needed to go into the Wheeled Mayakashi, which is their level 3 synchro monster. Then, Daki's effect would activate from the graveyard to bring itself back out, due to the synchro monster it just brought out using itself as a material, which would then allow you to use it with the level 3 to go into the level 5 synchro, which would bring it back out again, and then let you go into the level 7 synchro, which would let you go into the level 9, and then finally the level 11. So it's kind of used to just get all of the synchro Mayakashis into the graveyard, because they all have effects almost exactly the same as Gashadokuro, just different requirements for how they can special summon themselves from the graveyard, and different effects when they are special summoned from the graveyard, with the level 9 and level 7 synchros having the best graveyard effects, as it allows them to actually destroy cards on the field. So Gashadokuro, the Skeletal Mayakashi, isn't half bad, and does see play within its archetype, but only because its archetype allows it to come out so easily, and it's kind of surpassed by its lower level counterparts. Although being easy to bring out is definitely a benefit, which is why it makes on this list at a higher spot than some of the other monsters I've talked about so far. And at number 6, we have number 84, Pain Gainer. This is a rank 11 Xyz monster, which has the effect where each time your opponent activates a spell or trap card, you get to inflict 600 damage to them. Kind of like Red Eye's Flare Metal Dragon, but only for spell and traps, which is pretty good honestly. It'd be much better if it worked on monster effects, but working on 2/3 of the cards isn't half bad either. It also has another effect where it can detach a material to destroy all face-up monsters your opponent controls that have a defense less than this card's defense, and this card gains defense equal to the rank of all Xyz monsters you control times 200. So, if you only control Pain Gainer, it will have 2200 defense, which is honestly enough to destroy most opponents' boards, as not a lot of monsters have high defense. And what's really good about this card, and the main reason it sees play, is because it can bring itself out of the extra deck by just ranking itself on top of any rank 8 through 10 dark Xyz monster you control, as long as they have 2 or more Xyz materials on them. Now, what's good about this is that it's a nice middleman for going into number 77, the Seven Sins, which is a rank 12 monster with 4000 attack that can rank itself up on top of any rank 10 or 11 dark Xyz monster. And the Seven Sins has a protection effect, where if it would be destroyed, you get to detach an Xyz material instead. So if you want a huge 4000 attack beat stick, which also has protection, then Pain Gainer can allow you to bring it out easier in decks running level 8 monsters. Now, this isn't a super good combo, but it is a versatile option that's nice to have, as Pain Gainer itself has good effects on its own, and has the option to just become a 4000 attack beat stick if you run out of materials on it, which is why it's probably the second most played rank 11 Xyz monster. As there is surprisingly one other one that sees more play, which is hilarious because this is such an unpopular level, but there happen to be good 2 Xyz monsters in it. And at number 5, we have Superdreadnought Rail Cannon Juggernaut Liebe. This rank 11 monster with 4000 attack baseline can bring itself out on top of any rank 10 machine type Xyz monster you control, And this one doesn't require them to have any materials on them like Pain Gainer does. So you can actually use the effects of your rank 10 Xyz monster and then bring out Juggernaut on top of it afterwards. And what this card does is it can attack your opponent's monsters equal to the number of its Xyz materials plus 1. So, if it has no materials, then it can at least make 1 attack. And also, it can detach one of its materials to gain 2000 attack and defense for the rest of the turn. But you can only attack with this card that turn. So if you bring this card out with a normal rank 10 monster and don't use any of its materials, then rank it up to Superdreadnought, Rail Cannon, Juggernaut, Liebe, and then use its effect, it will be able to attack 3 times with 6000 attack. And if your opponent has 3 monsters on their side of the field, you basically just won right there. Because you see, the maximum attack most monsters have is around 3000. So if it attacks 3 monsters that have 3000 attack, that's 9000 points of battle damage, which is a little bit more than the starting life point count. And generally, cards with attacking effects don't see play unless their battle phase effects are just ridiculously good, like Borosword Dragon. I wouldn't call Liebe's effect ridiculously good, but it's definitely above average in the good department. So if you're able to bring it out and your opponent has a couple of monsters on their side of the field, and they have no way to negate the attack or destroy the card before it's able to attack, then you can win with just a whole bunch of battle damage. Which seems kind of difficult to pull off in meta decks, but surprisingly it works. And actually sees the most play of any rank 11 monster, because you see, there is this popular meta deck called Eldritch, which revolves around a level 10 monster called Eldritch the Golden Lord, which can special summon itself very easily. And there's this really good rank 10 monster called Superdreadnought Rail Cannon Gustav Max, which is able to do 2000 points of burn damage by detaching one of its materials. And that card is an option to go into Superdreadnought Rail Cannon Juggernaut Liebe. So, it just gives those decks the option to have a whole bunch of battle damage if they wanted, and was even used in Thunder Dragon decks because Thunder Dragon Titan is level 10. If a deck has access to level 10 monsters, then they have access to this card, which can kind of win you the game on your own under certain circumstances, so it occasionally sees competitive play. And at number 4, we have Archnemesys Eschatos. This card has the effect where you can declare one type on the field and then destroy all monsters on the field of that type, and then lock both players out of being able to special summon monsters of that type until the end of the next turn. So if your opponent is playing nothing but Fiend monsters, this card can shut them down for a whole turn and basically win you the game on its own. And it's easy to bring out. All you have to do is banish 3 monsters of different types from your graveyard or face up that you control. And a lot of decks play a whole bunch of monsters of different types, especially if you're running a diverse toolbox in the extra deck. And to top it all off, this card is just passively immune to destruction effects, so it actually has some pretty decent protection on top of an easy summoning condition and a great on-field effect. However, like I said a little bit earlier, the same reasons this card is easy to bring out is also why its effect might not be that effective against every deck, because a lot of decks play a whole bunch of different types of monsters, and the tiny fact that it also locks you out of being able to use those types as well. It's still really effective, but there's a good chance you'll only be able to destroy one monster, or maybe lock your opponent out of only one type of the mini type they regularly use. Which isn't half bad. The card can also be searched out through the Melody of Awakening Dragon, so it's easy to grab, and even has an attribute counterpart called Archnemesys Protoss, which has the exact same effects except with attributes, where you need to banish 3 monsters with different attributes from your graveyard, and it can lock both players out of a single attribute and destroy those cards. If anything, attribute locking your opponent is better than type locking, but it's harder to bring out as a lot of decks will play just one single attribute. Both are excellent cards though, and they're both level 11. I kind of like to only have one card from an archetype on a list, and I think Archnemesys Eschatos is just a little bit better, which is why it makes the number 4 spot. And at number 3, we have Zefraath. This is a level 11 pendulum monster with a really unique attack and defense power value with 3450 attack. In fact, this is the only monster in the game that has that baseline attack power value. Now, this card is a key component to the Zefraath archetype, as it has this really nice thing to the card where pretty much all of its effects are good. You see, if this card is placed in the pendulum zone, it has an effect where you can add a Zefraath pendulum monster from your deck to your extra deck, and then this card's scale becomes that card's scale until the end of the turn. So, this card can both allow you to choose which scales it has and set up your extra deck with pendulum monsters, which are both good thing in pendulum decks. So if you send the Yang Zing Zefraath monster to the extra deck, you can have his scale set to 7, then bring out that monster, which will allow you to search out the Zefraath Omni Negate, which is an excellent combo. Now it also has a monster effect, which I don't think actually gets used very much, but if this card is face up in your extra deck, you contribute all of your monsters, including at least 3 Zefraath monsters, to special summon this card, and then gain the effect to conduct 2 pendulum summons during your turn. And also, once per turn, it contribute any one monster to special summon a Zefraath monster from your deck, which is also good. Like I said, pretty much all of its effects are good, but the main use of this card is definitely its pendulum effect, which is absolutely amazing in pendulum decks, and allows very easy access to search out their Omni Negate, while also setting up their combos, which is why this card is a key component in the Zefraath archetype, which does actually see competitive success. And it just happens to be level 11 for some reason. I think that's mainly there so there's no confusion that you can't bring this card out with a regular pendulum summon. And at number 2, we have Infernoid Tierra. This is the boss monster of the Infernoid archetype and gains a whole bunch of effects when it's fusion summoned depending on the amount of Infernoid monsters used for its summon. And its fusion requirements are 2 specific Infernoid monsters plus 1 or more other generic Infernoid monsters, so you need to use at least 3 monsters to bring it out. However, it's most commonly brought out at up to 6 monsters thanks to the effect of Void Imagination, which is their continuous spell card that allows you to use up to 6 monsters from your deck as fusion materials if your opponent controls a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck. And Infernoids love to have their monsters in the graveyard, so this is an excellent effect for their deck, even if the fusion monster didn't even do anything good. Now, if the fusion monster is brought out with 6 monsters, it will gain 2 of its effects, where each player can send 3 cards from their extra deck to the graveyard, and each player sends the top 3 cards of their deck to the graveyard. Now, Infernoids love to mill their deck, so the second effect is good for them, but the first one can potentially allow them to destroy 3 of their opponent's monsters. You see, there's this fusion monster called Elder Entity Natis, which has an effect, if it's sent to the graveyard, that allows you to destroy 1 card on the field. So if you just send 3 of those to the graveyard with Tierra's effect, that allows you to destroy 3 of your opponent's cards. But also, your opponent has to thin out their own extra deck, and most normal extra decks don't have cards in there that they want to get rid of, so it's actually a benefit as well. And if for some reason you use 8 or more cards to bring this card out, it also allows you to return up to 3 of your banished cards to the graveyard, and if 10 or more are used, it also makes each player send their entire hand to the graveyard. Those 2 rarely get used, it's mainly used for its first 2 effects. So if brought out with Void Imagination, it allows a deck that loves to send their monsters to the graveyard to send 6 of them to the graveyard, then it allows them to destroy 3 of your opponent's cards, and then mill an additional 3 from the top of their deck as kind of a cherry on top. Infernoids do consistently see rogue success, which makes them a competitive deck, and their fusion monster definitely contributes to that status, which also happens to be level 11, which is why it makes a high spot on this list. And at number 1, we have Nibiru, the Primal Being. This is probably one of the best hand traps in the game, and it's at level 11 to make it harder to search out, so of course it would make the top spot on this list at such an unpopular level. Which is kind of ironic that one of the most played hand traps in the game is also part of one of the most unpopular levels in the game. Now, what this card does is if your opponent summons 5 or more monsters during a turn, you contribute all face-up monsters in the field in order to give your opponent a token which has the combined attack and defense of all of those monsters, and then you special summon Nibiru from your hand to your side of the field. So if your opponent is going through a whole bunch of combos in order to end on a board that's unbreakable, Nibiru can allow you to stop that before it gets too dangerous, and then get rid of a whole bunch of your opponent's very valuable materials on the field in order to give them a big, dumb, strong token, which you can get rid of very easily with any kind of removal. And you also get a 3000 attack monster as well, which can be used for extra deck plays. Nibiru is so good that it kind of single-handedly made control decks a lot better, because combo decks could be destroyed by Nibiru so easily, whereas control decks can play around Nibiru without worry. Alright, and that's the list. Now, I know this is a very niche topic, but I love these kinds of things, so if you have any other ideas for future videos just like this one, just let me know down in the comments. And also, fun fact, did you know only 42.4% of people who watch these videos are subscribed to the channel?